Good morning, dobro jutro. I'm delighted to be able to speak to you this morning on behalf of the European Association of Parental Alienation Practitioners. Welcome to the conference. I'd like to spend really just a few moments talking about the association, where it came from, what it hopes to achieve, and perhaps also what you may be able to gain from the association. The European Association of Parental Alienation Practitioners was formed in 2017 in Prague. It was felt for a number of years that people working in this field really didn't have much connection across Europe. We were very much working in isolation, and lots of us were dealing with some quite difficult circumstances in each of our own constituent countries. It was felt, therefore, that it would be useful to have a loose association of people working with parental alienation that would be able to share ideas and to communicate with each other about some of the issues that they were dealing with. It was convened really to give a voice to the issues that are arising from our practice with families. And that's quite different, I think, to a lot of the other associations around the world that deal with parental alienation. The European Association is particularly focused on practice because we feel that that is possibly one of the neglected areas within the field. It was designed to develop and share best practice around our work with families. Many of us are doing very innovative work in our own locations, and it was felt that it would be useful for us to bring those together so that we could discuss the things that work well and perhaps some of the things that don't work quite as well. It was aimed also, I think, to protect practitioners. One of the things that we all encounter when we work in this field is hostility, sometimes hostility from the parents and families that we work with, sometimes hostility from organizations who don't want this problem to be raised in public consciousness, and sometimes simply working in the hostile environment of the court arena. These things can be very difficult and very often leave us as practitioners quite exposed in our work. And it was felt that one of the things that would be useful would be to form an association that could begin to protect members. How might we protect members? Well, that's somewhat in development still, but I think one of the things that we're looking to do is to begin to establish practice standards, whereby both the people that we work for, the families, but also the judges, the judiciary, the whole professional arena around the family, is able to understand what it is we do and why we do those things, so that when people question the choices that we make in our therapeutic and assessment work with families, that we are able to say, this is the reason that we did those things. These are things that are accepted, they're based in the research, and they're based in best practice. The association also aims to raise an awareness of the needs and experiences of the alienated child. One of the concerns that I personally have as a professional and as a psychotherapist is that in many of the academic papers, in many of the theoretical papers around parental alienation, I find that the child is very often there as an object, but rarely there as a subject. And one of the things I feel that we really need to be doing as professionals is to be focusing on the unique experience of the child in the alienation affected family, so that we understand and have a deep knowledge of what it is that they're going through, so that we begin to help them in the ways that are going to relieve them of the terrible burden of alienation. The other major area that we wish to focus on is building a greater access to practice-informed research in the field. Again, this is an area where there is great richness and diversity in the work that we are doing as professionals in each of our different countries. But very often the work that we do clinically doesn't make its way into the academic papers. And that's something that needs to be addressed. We need to understand the clinical practice that helps families, and particularly helps children, to move out of the alienated state. The European Association has been set up as an academy with membership by invitation. We looked at various models for membership and for constitution, and at this time what was felt was that we needed to walk before we ran, and that means setting up a small organisation that is there really to share that best practice and to work to develop standards of practice in our field. We have a small board comprising at the moment of 6 practitioners who are all noted for working in this field in their particular countries. Of course, we're also linked to people who are working in lots of other countries as well, and picking their brains to bringing the best of their experience and the best of their practice. The association was really instigated and is now supported by a partnership between the Family Separation Clinic in London and the Zagreb Child and Youth Protection Centre, who we are delighted to say are hosting this year's conference. We are linking also to clinicians, though, in 15 different European countries, and I think that that is something that's very impressive. And I think if you look at the speaker list that we have for this coming 3 days, there are speakers from 13 different European countries, and that's in addition to our specially invited guests from the United States of America and Canada. And I think that's a really impressive thing, to have people coming from all different corners of Europe, bringing together their expertise, bringing together their experiences to share, so that we can all learn from the things that are going on around Europe. As well as obviously working within Europe, though, we are constantly in contact with professionals around the world and expanding our relationships with clinicians in North America, Asia, Africa, and Australasia. And I hope that sometime soon we may be able to add South America to that list as well. The European Association is completely self-funded and is not for profit. Volunteers give their time to make this project work. And the recent count of that was around 300 hours of time to create the association and bring the 3 conferences together. Our first conference was in Prague, followed by London, and now our online conference from Zagreb. And whilst it's very disappointing not to be able to meet everybody in the beautiful city of Zagreb, we are nevertheless very grateful to the Child and Youth Protection Centre, and also to all of the other people who've helped to bring this conference together and to make what I'm sure will be a very successful event. Time is given by the staff of the Zagreb Child and Youth Protection Centre and the Family Separation Clinic in London, both in administration, coordination, and development of the association. And the reason that we do this is because we feel that it's going to be beneficial for our work, and particularly beneficial for the families that we work with. Since our last conference, which was held in London in 2018, many of you may have attended that, we've done a number of things. One of the things that we did last year was raise concerns about generic therapy. There is still a propensity, a tendency for people to assume that any kind of therapy will deal with this problem. And what we know is that traditional, particularly family systems therapy that is unadapted, not only doesn't work with this cohort of families, but actually can make conditions very much worse for children. We released a statement about generic therapy that was based on the international research that there is, and that can now be used by professionals when they are arguing in court, for example, about what the most appropriate intervention may be for any child that they happen to be working with. We're also currently developing practice standards. The work that was begun last year in Switzerland, in St. Moritz, is now being developed further. We are consulting with professionals around those practice standards so that we can begin to at least have a draft set of standards out very shortly. We're also beginning to codify the approach to treatment. And I think it's important to say that the work of developing standards and approaches to this phenomenon is not about tying the hands of practitioners. We very much believe that all of the practitioners who work in this field can bring their own particular knowledge, their own training, their own skills, and their own experiences in helping to alleviate children from the problem of parental alienation. Nevertheless, all of those different components need to be set within a framework a framework that we know works, a framework that has been tested, but also a framework that will continue to develop as we continue the work of curating all of the best practice that there is out there. And finally, we've begun developing training plans for the judiciary and for social services in all of the European countries. This is still some way off finalisation, but what we would like to be able to do is have the kind of training materials available so that practitioners in all of the different countries across Europe can take those pieces of information and share them and develop training of their own to pass on to the professionals that work in those countries. And one of the things that we're very keen to do within the European Association is to make sure that all of our standards, all of our approaches, and all of our training, I guess, is adaptable to the different settings, the different socio and legal settings of the countries around Europe. As we move forward, we hope to complete and release those practice standards, as I say, for use across different borders. And they will need to be adaptable because we all work within different settings. We all work in countries who have different approaches to parental alienation. In countries such as Romania, very much the judiciary and the professional field that sits around it is very well aware of parental alienation and builds that into its approaches. In other countries, it's much less developed, and more work needs to be done there for education purposes. We'll be continuing to develop the structure of an academy of excellence for working in this field. That means bringing professionals together, inviting people who haven't hitherto been included in our work, and bringing together all of the expertise and knowledge that we have across Europe within that structure. We'll also be focusing on, I guess, looking at parental alienation much more as relational trauma in divorce and separation, seeing it less as something that is separate and completely unique in the field of psychology, and recognizing that this is actually a relational problem, and therefore we need to take relational approaches to dealing with that problem. And we'll continue to develop relationships with colleagues working in attachment, power and control, transgenerational, and other areas of psychology and psychotherapy to enrich the information base for delivery of therapy. One of the things I think that we need to learn is that staying, if you like, within the parental alienation field limits our understanding and limits our capacity to develop new innovative ways of working with families. There are people working within developmental psychology, working within transgenerational trauma, and many, many other fields who can contribute massively to the work that we do with the families that we work with. And that's something that we need to develop. And finally, we're going to be looking at ways of protecting colleagues who are working in this space. These are things that we will be discussing both with legal people, but also with the practitioners around Europe, so that we understand what their experiences of working within this field are. So those are some of the things that we're going to be working with over the coming years. As I say, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this week's conference, and thanks again to the Child and Youth Protection Centre in Zagreb for all their hard work in bringing this together. I hope that by the end of this week's conference, you will have found lots and lots of new things to build into your own work with these families, and we hope to maintain our connections with you over the years. Enjoy the conference.